You're driving down the highway with your family, windows down, music playing, when suddenly a truck swerves into your lane, and before you can even process what's happening, there's impact, metal crushing, glass shattering, and then silence. In that split second, there's only one thing between you and catastrophe, one piece of technology you've trusted your entire life without ever questioning it: your airbag. But what if I told you that for millions of people, that trust was betrayed? What if the very thing designed to save your life was secretly turned into a weapon by corporate greed and calculated negligence? Today, we're diving into the dark underbelly of the automotive industry, where human lives became spreadsheet numbers and billion-dollar companies decided your safety wasn't worth the cost. If you're ready to uncover the truth they never wanted you to know, smash that like button right now and subscribe, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see every car on the road. Hey, this is Mark, and you're welcome to AUTOSAYS. Let me take you back to a seemingly ordinary day in 2009 when a woman in Oklahoma pressed her brake pedal and nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. Her Honda Accord's airbag had deployed randomly while she was driving at 70 miles per hour on the interstate, and in the chaos, shrapnel from that airbag tore through the cabin like a grenade going off. She survived, barely, but with injuries so severe that doctors said she was lucky to be alive. Now here's where it gets chilling. This wasn't a freak accident or a manufacturing defect in just one car. This was the beginning of the largest automotive safety scandal in history, and it had been quietly unfolding for nearly a decade. The company behind these deadly devices was Takata Corporation, a Japanese automotive parts supplier that had been making airbags since the 1980s. But somewhere along the way, something went terribly wrong. You see, Takata had developed a new type of airbag inflator using ammonium nitrate as the propellant, and if that chemical compound sounds familiar, it's because it's the same explosive material used in the Oklahoma City bombing. Yeah, you heard that right. They essentially put a volatile explosive in the steering wheel of your family sedan. Now, in normal conditions, ammonium nitrate can be relatively stable, but here's the problem that Takata knew about and deliberately ignored. When exposed to heat and humidity over time, this chemical becomes wildly unstable. And where do cars spend most of their lives? Outside, in the heat, in the humidity, in the exact conditions that turn these airbags into ticking time bombs. Can you imagine knowingly putting a product in millions of vehicles that degrades into something lethal? But wait, it gets worse. Internal documents that later surfaced during investigations revealed that Takata engineers had raised red flags about these inflators as early as 2004. They conducted secret tests that showed the propellant could explode with excessive force, sending metal shrapnel flying through the passenger compartment at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. And what did the executives do with this information? They buried it, deleted test data, manipulated safety reports, and continued selling these defective airbags to virtually every major automaker on the planet. Honda, Toyota, Ford, BMW, General Motors, Nissan, the list goes on and on. By 2014, reports of injuries and deaths started piling up, and the numbers were staggering. A teenager in Houston killed instantly when her airbag severed her carotid artery. A pregnant woman in Malaysia, same story. An elderly man in Florida found dead in his parked car after a minor fender bender triggered the airbag. These weren't just statistics on a page. These were real people with families, dreams, futures, all erased because a corporation decided profit margins mattered more than human life. Now, let's talk about the money, because that's what this whole nightmare really comes down to. See, there were safer alternatives to ammonium nitrate, propellants that didn't become unstable over time, but they cost more, just a few dollars more per airbag. Takata was producing tens of millions of these inflators every year, and switching to a safer propellant would have cut into their profit margins. So they made a calculated decision, a cold, ruthless business calculation that your life, your spouse's life, your children's lives were worth less than the cost of a fancy coffee. The financial impact on Takata tells you everything you need to know about how massive this cover-up became. When the scandal finally exploded into public view, the recall started, and they didn't stop. First, it was hundreds of thousands of vehicles, then millions, then tens of millions. By 2017, it had become the largest automotive recall in United States history, affecting more than 70 million airbag inflators in over 40 million vehicles. The sheer scale was unprecedented, and automakers were drowning in recall notices, trying to logistically replace all these deadly devices. But here's something that should make your blood boil. Even after the recall was announced, even after deaths were confirmed and linked to these airbags, Takata executives continued to deny responsibility. They blamed the victims, suggested driver error, pointed fingers at automakers for improper installation, anything to avoid accountability. It took federal regulators threatening criminal charges before they finally admitted what they'd known all along, that their airbags were defective, dangerous, and deadly. The financial fallout was biblical. Takata faced billions in fines, lawsuits, and recall costs. In 2017, the company filed for bankruptcy, the biggest corporate collapse in Japanese manufacturing history. But here's the twisted irony. The executives who made these decisions, who buried the evidence, who chose profits over people, most of them walked away with golden parachutes, retirement packages, and comfortable lives, while families buried their loved ones. And you want to know the most disturbing part of this entire saga? As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Takata wasn't alone in knowing about these defects. Several automakers had received complaints and reports about airbag ruptures years before the official recalls began, but they too remained silent. Why? Because recalls are expensive. They hurt stock prices, they damage brand reputation. So they ran their own cost-benefit analyses, literally calculating whether it was cheaper to pay out wrongful death settlements or issue a massive recall. This is called the Ford Pinto effect, named after a case in the 1970s where Ford Motor Company discovered their Pinto model had a fuel tank design flaw that could cause fires in rear-end collisions, and internal memos showed they calculated it would cost more to fix the design than to pay settlements to burn victims and their families, so they did nothing. The Takata scandal proved that decades later, this same sociopathic calculus was still being used. Now, you might be thinking, surely there are regulations to prevent this kind of thing, government agencies whose entire job is to protect consumers from dangerous products, right? Well, yes and no.
The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, is supposed to oversee automotive safety, but here's the ugly truth about regulatory capture. These agencies are often underfunded, understaffed, and filled with former industry executives who have more loyalty to their old employers than to public safety. When Takata was conducting those secret tests back in 2004, NHTSA had the authority to demand that information, but they didn't. Even when early complaints started trickling in, the agency was slow to investigate, slow to act, and seemingly more interested in preserving industry relationships than protecting American drivers. When Takata was conducting those secret tests back in 2004, NHTSA had the authority to demand that information, but they didn't. Even when early complaints started trickling in, the agency was slow to investigate, slow to act, and seemingly more interested in preserving industry relationships than protecting American drivers. It wasn't until journalists and independent safety advocates started connecting the dots and making noise that regulators finally felt enough pressure to take action. This raises a terrifying question. How many other ticking time bombs are currently in our vehicles that we don't know about? How many other manufacturers are running similar calculations right now, deciding whether your safety is worth their investment? The Takata scandal pulled back the curtain on an industry that often treats human life as an acceptable cost of doing business, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's talk about the victims for a moment, because they're not just numbers in a recall notice. There's Jewel Brankman, a young woman from New York who died in 2014 when her Honda Civic's airbag exploded during a minor accident. Her family's lawsuit revealed that Honda had known about airbag ruptures in that specific model year, but hadn't issued a recall for her region yet because they were prioritizing repairs in areas with higher humidity. Think about that. They had a map of where people were most likely to die, and they triaged recalls based on statistical probability rather than immediately fixing every single vehicle. Or consider Carlos Solis from Texas, who survived a Takata airbag explosion, but lost his right eye to shrapnel and suffered permanent facial scarring. He testified before Congress, showing his injuries to lawmakers, explaining how a simple parking lot fender bender turned him into a victim of corporate negligence. His medical bills exceeded $500,000, and the settlement he eventually received didn't come close to covering his suffering or lost wages. These stories repeat across continents in Japan, Malaysia, Australia, the United States. Everywhere these airbags were installed, and the global death toll now stands at over 30 confirmed fatalities, with hundreds more injured, some catastrophically. But experts believe the real numbers are higher because not all accidents are thoroughly investigated for airbag defects. So what happened in the aftermath? After Takata's bankruptcy, their assets were purchased by a Chinese company, and production continued under new management and supposedly improved safety standards. But the recalls are still ongoing. Today, right now as you're watching this, there are millions of vehicles on American roads with these defective airbags still installed. Part shortages, logistical challenges, and owners who never received recall notices or ignored them mean that people are still driving around with potential shrapnel bombs in their steering wheels. If you own a car made between 2002 and 2015, especially from Honda, Toyota, or Ford, you need to check if your vehicle is affected. Go to NHTSA's website, enter your VIN number, and find out if you're at risk, because the automakers aren't going to knock on your door. They're hoping you'll just forget about it or trade in your car before anything happens. The financial settlements from this scandal were massive, but ultimately inadequate. Takata pleaded guilty to criminal charges and paid $1 billion in penalties, but that money was divided among so many victims and claimants that individual payouts were often shockingly small. Meanwhile, the automakers who installed these airbags, who in some cases knew about problems and stayed quiet, they faced their own lawsuits and settlements totaling billions more. But again, for corporations with annual revenues in the hundreds of billions, these penalties were just the cost of doing business, a rounding error on their balance sheets. What's the lesson here? It's simple and devastating. In the automotive industry, like in so many others, your safety is a commodity that can be traded against profit margins, stock prices, and executive bonuses. The engineers and safety professionals within these companies often try to do the right thing, but when they're overruled by executives whose compensation is tied to quarterly earnings, tragedy becomes inevitable. This isn't just about Takata. This is about a system that prioritizes shareholder value over human life, and until we fundamentally change how corporations are held accountable, it will happen again. The Takata airbag scandal should have been a turning point, a moment when regulators, lawmakers, and consumers demanded better, demanded that human life be valued above profit. But here we are, years later, and the industry continues much as before, perhaps with slightly more oversight, perhaps with executives being a bit more careful about what they put in writing, but the fundamental calculus hasn't changed. So the next time you get in your car, the next time you buckle your seatbelt and start the engine, remember that your safety depends not just on engineering and technology, but on the ethical choices of people you'll never meet and boardrooms you'll never see. And sometimes, too often, those people choose wrong. If this story shook you, if it made you angry or scared or determined to hold these corporations accountable, then share this video, spread the word, because the only power we have as consumers is information and collective action. Check your vehicle for recalls, demand transparency from automakers, support stronger safety regulations, and never forget that behind every recall notice, behind every corporate settlement, there are real people whose lives were forever changed by decisions that never should have been made. The Takata airbag scandal isn't just history, it's happening right now, and the next chapter depends on whether we're paying attention.